if today were your last day, what is the one word that you would want to be remembered for?
Father. I mean, if there's any role I want to excel at, and that is something that can sometimes be challenging when you have the kind of schedule and responsibilities that I do, it would be that. That's my legacy. Nobody will remember whether or not I called NVIDIA at 95. They'll see what my legacy is as expressed through my daughter.
Joining me today is Mark Lopresti. I am so honored to have Mark join me. He is a lawyer, which he and I bonded over immediately. He's the founder of Lopresti Law Group, the founder of Battlefin Group, IDI Group, and most recently, the CEO of Market Rebellion. He also appears routinely on The Closing Bell on CNBC, as well as Fox News, Bloomberg, and every, I think, international and national financial show there is. I met him at Wealth Conference in Miami back in the spring, and just like I said, immediately hit it off because we both spoke the lawyer language. I also had the pleasure of meeting his daughter, so that was an amazing honor. Welcome to my show, Mark. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Michelle. That's a wonderful introduction. I will say, though, I have been retired from the legal profession for almost 5 years now. So just to make sure that that's clear and accurate to our viewers. But as you can take the lawyer out of the law, or whatever the expression is. I certainly still use a lot of those tools in the toolbox when I'm running our companies or in my investing activities.
You still speak the language.
Still speak the language. And also, since the last time somebody updated that, I've become a contributor also on CNN and to 4 different shows on Newsmax.
Well, we need to have your team update your LinkedIn.
Oh, yeah. Well, that's probably true. That's probably true. But great to be with you today.
Yes. Thank you so much. So the first question I always ask anybody, because my perspective is strategic reinvention. So personal or business. Not that I think there's a lot of distinction between the two, but my first question that I always ask everybody is, we've all had that time where you were in the ditch and life kicked you in the ditch. And when you're in the ditch, you think you're the only one in the ditch and you're the only one that's ever been in the ditch so bad. And you really don't think you can see tomorrow. Tell me about the time that you were so far down in the ditch that you didn't think you could see tomorrow, and tell me how you got out of it.
Well, having been on Wall Street and in the industry for as many years as I have, that's happened, probably more than once, Michelle. I mean, I can think of, when things looked pretty bad during the great financial crisis. I was running a legal practice at the time that was very heavily reliant, if not completely reliant, on Wall Street and ongoing deal making and capital markets type activity, all of which came to a screeching halt, of course, during the great financial crisis. Certainly September 11th, when I was very early on in my career.
Because you're in New York City. I mean.
Yeah. My office at the time was a couple of blocks away from the World Trade Center. My apartment at the time was a couple of blocks away from the World Trade Center. So I was unable to access either of those two locations for a good number of months. Obviously, deal making and all of the other kind of activity that I relied upon for my livelihood also, came to a bit of a halt for a period of time. So, I think that's a really, really tough question in terms of, what do you do to turn it around? It's in those times where a good, healthy dose, I think, of optimism is important. I think faith is also very important and has played a role for me, both in tough times as well as in good times. And just having that entrepreneurial grit. So many of the founders and so many of the people that I have come to know, either as friends or as business partners or colleagues, that have made themselves, in some cases, billionaires, have gone through incredibly rough periods, either personal bankruptcies, company failures. In fact, there's probably very few repeat successful entrepreneurs that cannot tell you that they've gone through some really tough times.
Yeah.
And it's funny, Michelle, my business partner and one of my dearest friends, John Nigerian, who I know you also met, likes to often say that you learn more from the losing trades
Yes.
than you do from the winning trades, because the losing trades, those tough times, they leave a much greater, a disproportionately greater impact on you emotionally and on your psyche. So I think it's really important, and it's something you mentioned. My daughter, it's something that I try to instill in her. To embrace failure, learn from it. Do not let it get you in the dumps and the doldrums and hide under the covers. Hiding from the world. But what can we do better? That post-mortem analysis, and I tell my team at Mark Rebellion all the time, we have to analyze our failures and understand what went wrong, and we have to analyze our successes with the same degree of accuracy.
I like that, because I always think of, as lawyers, there's always a best lawyer of the year of some sort award that's coming
Sure.
out. And a lot of times they want you to contribute some ad money or some money somehow to receive those awards. And I tell people, I am neither the best of whatever award I've received lately, nor the worst of whatever you've ever heard of me. I am somewhere in the middle of those things, and I think that's true for all of us.
I would agree.
Yeah. So you mentioned entrepreneurial grit. Do you think that grit is something that is innate, that you have to be born with? Or do you think that grit is something that can be developed?
Yeah, listen. I think there is a bit of nature nurture with all of these things, right? And I think we all have the ability for greatness within us. I think that's kind of how God created us, right? Some of us it comes easier than others, but I do think that it's a skill that can be honed. I think it's a skill that can be honed through mentorship and just been by putting yourself in the game, right? Not being afraid to fail, making those big bold moves, understanding, fortune does favor the bold. There's no question about that. So I think the short answer to that is it can be developed, but some of us are born with a little more of it than others, for sure.
Yeah, yeah. I like that grit can be developed through failure, though. That's an interesting perspective for sure. That it does take failure to develop grit, because nobody ever developed anything really through just having good days, right?
That's right.
Yeah,
That's right.
yeah. That's interesting. How do you help your daughter develop grit?
Um, that I think through example, right? She growing up in New York City, growing up, fairly comfortable lifestyle, not really facing that much adversity, right? Certainly comparatively speaking.
Right.
So it's harder sometimes when kids, and of course, this is why we work as hard as we do. We want our children, just as my parents and grandparents did, to have a better life and more opportunity than they did, and to see things develop and grow throughout the generations is a wonderful thing. And it actually becomes a little bit more of a challenge when you have children of privilege. And I see even some of her classmates that come from very privileged, very wealthy families, sort of losing perspective or not even having it to begin with. So I think it's important to keep, and I try to even with my daughter, I try to keep her to have a good and healthy perspective, to understand that not everybody in the world lives in the same way and has the same opportunities, to be respectful of others, and to be motivated, right? I mean, that's really one of the biggest things, is just sort of trying to figure out how to give our children the kind of motivation. It's actually something that I think is sadly sort of lacking in the younger generations,
Sure.
when I see things like work ethic and stuff like that. But it's the best thing we can do is lead by example. And I drag her to events like the one that you met her about. I drag
Yes.
her to.
Yeah.
I shouldn't say drag, because she goes
Yeah.
very,
She
very
seemed very
willingly and
willing to
happily.
be there.
Yeah, yeah. It definitely has gotten easier as she's gotten older. But I drag her to the TV studios. I drag to sort of see, like, this is what you got to do. This is what you got to put into it if you want to get the same a success and the same benefits out of life. It does not come easy, because it doesn't, even if it might look easy.
Right. And she's how old?
17.
17. Oh, wow. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I was just so impressed with how articulate and confident that she was, and introduced herself as an entrepreneur. I just was so impressed with that, and I intend to invite her on my show. She also agreed to come on my show and talk about being a teenage entrepreneur, which I'm so impressed with.
Thank you.
How how do you influence her, to be an entrepreneur, as opposed to any other thing that she could be? Or is that something that she's choosing?
Yeah, it's definitely something that she's choosing, right? I think that it's the wrong approach as a parent to be too strict, or too much of like, oh, you have to go and do this. You need to be, doctor, lawyer, or what have you. I think that's the wrong approach. I think in seeing other kids her age, classmates and contemporaries that maybe come from families that take a different approach to what they want or they think their kids should do, it actually winds up having the opposite effect. She actually refers to it as the film student effect. And by that, she's talking about how all of these kids, and it's very puzzling to her, being an entrepreneur and a budding financier, that all of these kids want to go into the film industry. And it's like, what's the deal there? And I think when you look at that, not that it's not a great industry, but it's one that's being disrupted by things like AI in a massive, massive way. I think if you look at a lot of those kids, not all, but a lot of those kids, I think some of it is rebelling against what was sort of a more authoritarian approach to what their kids should and shouldn't do. So,
Yeah.
I think just, she grew up around finance. She grew up, you have pictures of her sitting, 1 or 2 years old in front of the television, watching me on CNBC or other things like that. And I think it's just that exposure, just let that naturally develop. And it's something I'm really, really proud of. But if she said, hey, I want to be a nurse, or I want to be a teacher, or I want to be whatever, I would 1000% support that, because I think for everyone, not just for my daughter, but for everyone, one of the keys to happiness in life is, it's an old expression, Michelle, but if you really find something that you love, you'll never work another day. And I tell you, with as much of a schedule as I keep, as you point out, I run several companies, I serve on a lot of boards. Yesterday, the day before was a great example. I had 5 television appearances on 3 different networks. Very, very, very hectic schedule. But notwithstanding all that, it doesn't feel like work. I don't wake up in the morning and go, oh, geez, I got to go to work. No, it's just, it's a happy place to be. So
Right.
it's something I want for her as well.
How do you help her or influence her to balance between being a strong woman or upcoming woman versus being likable? For me, as a much older woman, not a young woman anymore, that seems to me to be quite a conundrum for women, especially in corporate or finance. This conundrum between being strong and being likable, between having to smile versus having to be direct and to the point. Have you had any influence on her about how to handle those type of particularly women's issues in corporate finance or corporate America?
Well, I tell you, that's really a tough one, and I am probably not as well equipped to guide her in those matters as the other strong, influential people in her life, the strong, influential women in her life, like her mom, my mother, her grandmother, who plays a big role in her life, who have all managed in their own way, to balance that likability and confidence, and not to have that likability be mistaken for weakness or something
Right.
else.
Right.
I got to tell you, Michelle, on this one, I can really take zero credit for it. I'm obviously super proud of how my daughter has developed. because I think she does, as you point out, have that balance of charm
Yes.
that's also backed up by a little bit of knowledge and self confidence. But one thing I will say, I would love it if particularly girls her age, if they treated each other better.
Right.
There just seems to be so much just jealousy and pettiness that is not a good thing. Not a good thing.
Yeah, I agree with you on that. I think that's not a new problem, right?
No,
So
no.
you mentioned that you were on, I think, 5 shows yesterday. I mean, certainly the global economy and global finance is a huge topic in current events right now. How do you see patterns between, let's say, international finance, current events, and even the family table? Like, I think of it as the coffee table, the boardroom table, and the government table that President Trump sits at. Do you see patterns that are similar between all of those different tables?
Well, in terms of influencing conversation, there's no doubt, right? And we're in a particular point in history because President Trump is such a firebrand, because President Trump is advancing such policies and changes so aggressively, right? That perhaps other presidents, other administrations have not done, because he believes, they share the belief, that there are some things that need to be done in this country pretty radically to bring about change, particularly economically. And that's a big part of the reason why the president has embarked upon this what some refer to as trade wars with countries like China. I mean, we have not just economic trade imbalances, right, with foreign nations, because we have allowed the playing field, the global trade playing field, to go so far away from being in our favor over the years. But also when it comes to matters of national security, I mean, you take a country like China, which does not have our best interest at heart, even though we are their largest customer on the global trade stage. They mine 70% of the world's rare earth and critical minerals. And these are things that are not just important for consumer electronics, but for our defense infrastructure.
Right.
But they refine 90% of those critical minerals and those rare earths. Similarly, in the pharmaceutical world, where we learned a very difficult lesson during COVID, that we did not have access to the right amount of raw materials for our pharmaceutical industry to keep our country healthy. Those are things that, if they are permitted to persist, represent not only significant threats to our national economy, but significant threats to our national security that will manifest really negatively over time. So I think we're in, which is also part of the reason why I'm loving it from somebody that is in the media world. Part of the reason why I have so much airtime lately is because I'm an economist and a market strategist, and when you have so much going on, there's so much more demand, right, than when things are sort of humming along and we're talking about
Without
other
a lot of
topics.
controversy.
Yeah, that for sure, for sure. So yeah, I mean, I think that there's no doubt that those topics are far more front and center, for the kitchen table or the coffee table than they are in other periods of history. But as I said, I think it's really, really important that we are in this period where we have a strong administration that is looking to sort of change some of these things and make life better fundamentally for all Americans.
If you were having a conversation with President Trump today, what's one piece of advice that you would give him?
Well, I have spoken to the president on a number of occasions, and I can tell you, giving him advice is definitely a challenge.
Right. I'm not saying he's going to take it.
Well, it's not even whether or not he takes it; it's how he takes the fact that somebody would presume to give him advice. So you're putting me on dangerous territory here. Let's stay the course, right?
Yeah.
I mean, although I don't think that that's something that he needs. I
Right.
think he's done a really great job of putting together a really, really strong cabinet. Howard Lutnick, my family, going back to September 11th. My uncle, unfortunately, was the head man on the totem pole there on the 101st floor at Cantor Fitzgerald, and we lost him along with 1,100 of his coworkers and employees. So we've known Howard Lutnick for many years. Very very talented financier, a man that understands capital markets remarkably well, perhaps better than others. So having him as the Commerce Secretary, Scott Bessent as the Treasury Secretary, also coming from private finance, from the hedge fund world. Also a really, really brilliant guy. So I think those are just two examples of some of the people that the president, I think, has very rightfully and wisely. Pete Hegseth, who of course I knew from Fox. Pete also very talented. Just in one of those people sort of born with a lot of those qualities that we were talking about earlier. I think he's doing a great job, with the Defense Department. So I think he's got plenty of good advice around him, and it would be hard for me. It'd be hard for me to offer anything that he doesn't already have. Let's put it that way.
So in the last, month or two or three, has there been anything that's happened that you kind of point to that you're saying like, this is something that's happened that is, really going to look back in history that is, going to change everything? I mean, there's so many things that have happened in the last several months that I think could be those things. But is there one of those things that really stands out to you more than anything else?
Yeah, I mean, the short answer is yes, and it's not a positive thing, right? We obviously we're just a few days away from. And still experiencing both an actual and a metaphorical hangover from election night. And I think what happened in New York stands out to me the most. A city that
I
went
wondered
through.
if you were going to say that. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, listen, not to bring up 9/11 again, but right, as a city that went through, the most horrible terrorist attack on American soil in the history of our young nation, to elect, a social democrat who proudly posts pictures of ties to a radical imam who was directly tied to an unindicted co-conspirator in the first World Trade Center bombing, who advances anti-Semitic rhetoric, who advances rhetoric and ideas, bold face, saying the quiet parts out loud, is really terrifying to me. It's really terrifying to me. I think ultimately, as he's already learning, he's not going to have the ability to impose quite the same degree of economic carnage on the city that he had hoped. Whether it's not having the ability to dramatically raise taxes disproportionately and discriminately, by the way, on high income earner neighborhoods, which are perhaps even disproportionately inhabited by certain races, religious backgrounds. There's a lot of discrimination. There's a lot of hate that's behind all of that. And look, I understand that New York City is too damn expensive. I understand that it is extraordinarily difficult for hardworking people, including people that are our first responders and things like that. I understand that there is a lot of inequality. There's a lot of income inequality. If he's able to impose a $30 an hour minimum wage, and yeah, I don't disagree that the minimum wage should possibly be higher, but if he's able to impose a $30 an hour minimum wage, that will be the last nail in the coffin for thousands of small businesses in New York City, Michelle. That I mean, our own internal estimates from the analysis that my guys have done over at Market Rebellion is we could lose within the first 6 months or so of his administration between 100 and 150,000 jobs. We could see thousands of businesses flee. You already see, I spent a lot of my time in South Florida, as you probably also know. Real estate there, like real estate agents haven't slept this week. This is literally what I'm hearing, right? I mean,
I have a couple of friends that are real estate agents down there. Yeah.
Yeah. People are buying
friends
things.
that are real estate agents here in Dallas.
Yeah. Well, Dallas, I think, Texas is going to be another state that is the beneficiary, unfortunately, of a lot. And who's going to be leaving? It's the high income earners. It's the job creators. It's the taxpayers. It's the entrepreneurs. And what Mr. Mamdani doesn't seem to really understand is so much of the lifeblood of New York City's economy are like finance and tech. And those are two industries that are highly mobile. If I want to run a business where I'm running restaurants in New York City, I got to be in New York City. But if I'm running a company that's doing AI applications or so much of finance, I can be anywhere, as COVID taught
Right.
us. And it's really, really tone deaf. It's really scary. But it's the radical the nature of his rhetoric. It's the radical nature of what I think he really does believe
Right.
that scares me the most. I pray for our Jewish community in New York, which is such a critical element of so much of what makes New York City great. I think this is electing him is just an absolute massive affront and slap in the face to a community that's already suffered quite a bit over the past couple of years. So I worry a lot. I don't. There's not a lot of things that keep me up at night, but the past couple of nights, I think myself and a lot of other people, New Yorkers, are really fearful for what's next for the city.
Yeah, I wondered if that was, because there's been so many great things that have happened. The war in the Middle East, U.S.-China relations taking a turn for the better. There's just been so many good things that have happened,
Yeah.
and then that happened this week, and I wondered if that was going to be your answer. It's been interesting living here in Dallas because in the last, a little over a year, there's been such a move in the financial markets. Whenever Rick Perry and others announced that they were going to create a Texas stock exchange,
Sure.
then along comes the New York Stock Exchange and said, "Oh, hey, we think we'll come to Dallas too." And then comes NASDAQ and says, "Oh, hey, I think we'll
Yeah.
come to Dallas too." And so now it looks like we're going to have at least branches of the two major stock exchanges coming here. And all the major, financial firms have, I think I heard on the news the other day, more people in Dallas than they have in New York. I think all of them now have more people in Dallas
Yeah.
than they have in New York. And building campuses right, left, and center, in or around downtown where everything's going to be. And I don't know if you've seen it. The building that they're putting the New York Stock Exchange in, the Dallas branch, is incredibly gorgeous. It makes me wonder if they've been kind of preparing for New York to take a turn for the worse.
Well, a couple things there. One, when I started on the floor of the New York Stock Exchange, when I was very young, when we still traded in fractions, it was still, open outcry and hand signals and all of that. As trading has moved more and more upstairs, as we refer to it, because it
Right.
literally used to be upstairs from the floor. That's not the case anymore. It's data centers in New Jersey and other parts of the world. Um, the business of finance, the business of trading, the business of Wall Street. By the way, you probably know we're referring to what's going on in Dallas now as Y'all Street, which I
Yeah.
absolutely
Well,
love.
they started out calling the Texas Stock Exchange Y'all Street,
Yeah,
and now they're calling all of it Y'all Street.
yeah, absolutely, absolutely. So I think a lot of it has to do, maybe not quite as draconian thought as we all sort of knew that New York was eventually going to be run by a radical Muslim anti-Semite. I did not have that on my bingo card, to be very honest with you.
Right.
But I think it's a matter of technology making Wall Street and the industry far more mobile. And two, look, Texas is a really well-run state. Okay, there's a reason why there has been an influx of business into Texas, of
Yeah.
fleeing from places like California. Elon Musk being one of the pioneers of that, and I think Texas is a lot to be excited about because one of the things that we're keeping an eye on, both in terms of from a personal investment perspective as well as stocks that are in this, is AI and data center infrastructure co-locating with the means of production of traditional the oil and gas industry, which is sort of this really very interesting a combination of the old school oil patch Permian Basin guys and the Silicon Valley tech guys coming together. But let's be honest, if I can put a data center somewhere in Midland or in the patch that can take advantage of the
Right.
flare gas, right? This is all
Mhm.
this energy that's just being wasted, that's just literally going up into the air every day. Like, holy cow. And so, we think that based on our analysis, I did a research report on this almost a year ago now that was really widely distributed and very well read. where we concluded that we need in new energy sources in the United States the equivalent of all of Japan's current energy consumption
Wow.
every year for the next 10 years. So, what does that mean? That means that we're going to need to get our energy to power these data centers from everything, not only
Right.
from existing traditional grid, from oil and gas, from wind and
Solar.
solar and renewable, and also something that's been a really great investment thesis for us over the past 14 months or so from nuclear. But I think Texas is in a really privileged position. I am bullish Texas, and I think that there's a lot to look forward to in terms of ongoing economic prosperity for that state.
Yeah, well, we look forward to you, moving on down here. I mean, I know you're a Miami guy too, and New York, but Texas is welcoming Mark Lopresti to come on down.
We
uh,
have a lot of friends there, and it's funny. We talked about my daughter a lot, but that is one of her absolute most favorite places in the world to go. We have friends that have a beautiful ranch outside Cisco, where we can sort of spend a week or so and live sort of the way we think America felt like 50 or 100 years ago, and it's something
yeah,
that's only possible in the great state of
yeah.
Texas. So
Well, and your Nigerian friend is a big SMU guy, so I know they
yes,
spend a lot of time here too. So, you mentioned AI and crypto and the energy issues. I know that you're a big digital currency guy.
sure, yeah.
For a lot of people, digital currency is a new topic. And I know that it's not for you, but I think for a lot of middle America, it's a new topic. What do you think are the biggest misconceptions that people have about digital currency?
Yeah, so I think one of them is that it's a fad, right? Certainly, and we're sort of in the second evolution, the second crypto spring. Crypto and digital currency people sort of like to talk about, it's crypto winter, crypto spring, or summer, or what have you. And we've already gone through one boom bust cycle. We're in another boom cycle right now, due very largely, I got to say, to the Trump administration embracing it and embracing it in meaningful ways through the propagation of the Genius Act and the Clarity Act, which were the first two meaningful pieces of legislation ever in the United States to bring the requisite amount of regulation. And I love actually how both of these bills were named, because they're very aptly named in terms of what they're intended to do. One is to bring regulatory clarity to the industry and to the assets within the industry, and the other is to support, from the perspective of the government, providing a pro-business landscape for the industry. The industry grew outside the United States for so many years,
Right.
particularly under the auspices of the previous director of the SEC, Gary Gensler, who I was very vocally an outspoken critic of during the entirety of his administration. And what we wound up doing was knowingly or unknowingly exporting so much innovation in digital currency, crypto, blockchain outside the United States. It also provided a really great platform for bad actors, people like Sam Bankman-Fried, to set up shops in loosely regulated offshore jurisdictions and cause the loss of many billions of dollars in investor money here in the United States. So, I think when people say, oh, this is just a cash grab, on the part of the president and his family, I think that's an unfair characterization. I think this is, let's bring clarity, let's bring appropriate regulatory construct so the industry knows and understands the rules of the road, it can develop and flourish. And here's something that I say a lot when I'm asked questions around crypto and digital currency. There are a few things on Wall Street that are true 100% of the time. I'm going to share one of them with you and your viewers right now. Regulatory clarity enhances demand for an emerging asset, right? So if your broker at JP Morgan, Merrill Lynch, Morgan Stanley, if you say, hey, I want to buy Ethereum, and they go, well, I don't know what this is. I don't know if it's a currency, a security, a commodity. We can't custody it. We can't hold it. That's great that you're being a pioneer, but sorry, we can't, right?
Right.
So when there's regulatory clarity, and an emerging asset can come into the traditional, or TradFi, as we like to say, into the traditional market infrastructure you see proliferation and you see a substantial increase in the value of those assets. That's what's happened, right? Love or hate the president, when you have clarity and you have regulatory certainty around the treatment of these assets, you've now seen all of these new ETFs pop up. You've seen an absolute proliferation of something called digital asset treasuries, or DATs. There's been 160 of them that have gone public in the last less than 9 months. That was a concept pioneered by somebody I know very well, Michael Saylor, MicroStrategy, now called Strategy. So common misconceptions: one, that it's a fad; two, that it's hard to learn and it's not something that the average person can invest in. Absolutely not true. If anybody takes the time to learn a little bit, they can have exposure and should have exposure to this emerging asset class. It is that regulatory clarity and certainty that has actually also made that easier. So if you don't want to open a Coinbase account, you don't want to open a MetaMask wallet, you don't want to get into learning about cold wallets and all that stuff that the crypto crazies love, I can buy IBIT, which is an ETF on the New York Stock Exchange that gives me
Right.
exposure to Bitcoin. I can trade options on that IBIT, which gives me even more TradFi tools in the toolbox to express my what my belief is in terms of the price trajectory for those major cryptocurrencies. So I think it's going to continue to be mainstream. I think a lot of what the president and the administration is doing with this regulation and with the current SEC administrators, Chief Pro, embracing of it in an intelligent way. And by the way, that doesn't mean like, let's just party wildly and develop, crap coins and cash grab. No, it's meaningful regulation that's easy to understand and easy to follow. That will make exposure to this emerging asset class available to all Americans, and I think that's a good thing.
Do you see any tug and pull between the concept that it was developed to be decentralized versus the regulation of it now,
Of
though?
course. Yeah, no, of course. I mean, so the degens, as they're called, right? The blockchain degenerates, and then that's a loving term. It's not derogatory. Are a little bit up in arms about this,
Yeah.
although it's funny. You've seen that cacophony of concern around, well, hey, wait a minute, we were supposed to be decentralized, we were supposed to be self-regulated or deregulated, it was supposed to be, this sort of cool, like, hippie finance movement, like what's going on here? You've seen that rhetoric toned down in large part because you've seen the increase in the value and appreciation value of the assets associated with that.
Right.
It's an industry that's created a lot of millionaires, 100 millionaires, and billionaires, a lot, disproportionate to many other industries, certainly in terms of relative to the amount of time it took. So is it at odds with some of those sort of early fundamental, Satoshi Nakamoto's thoughts on what it was all supposed to be?
Right.
Sure. But this is one lesson we learned from this. You cannot have your decentralized, unregulated cake and eat it too on the basis of mass adoption and scale.
Right.
So
Yeah.
which
Right.
one
At
do you
scale.
want?
Yeah, that seems to me to be the issue, is that at scale there has to be some regulation.
Of course.
When it was new and small, I mean the decentralization, maybe was a little more realized. For me, I think when I was learning about cryptocurrency, I think the hard part for me to grasp, I'm a touch it, feel it person. I still like to go to the store now. I've started embracing shopping on the internet, but I still like to go to the store and try on clothes and feel how it feels. And to me, the intangibility of it is still a little hard to grasp. And I think for a lot of people, that is a hard concept to understand, how a digital something, like, how can we all agree that it is monetary? Although, I mean, how do we all agree that a dollar bill is a dollar bill? But so that is still a concept. But for me, I think I wrapped my head around it at WealthCon whenever you and I met. Whenever I heard multiple speakers talk about Bitcoin as gold being a finite asset as compared to other types of cryptocurrency being different than that, and why they were different. And that's when it kind of started making sense to me that, the dollar bill or gold or whatever, like we all still just agree that something has value.
Right.
You could be a prisoner in a prison and agree that cigarettes have value. You
Sure.
know, the economy, the world could go to shit tomorrow, and we might agree that seeds have value, that corn has value, that,
Yeah.
that rocks have value. I mean, so anything that we agree has value is the commodity. So, that's kind of how I wrapped my head around it. But I think that's a hard concept for people.
It is because I think you nailed it. By the way, right? So I think that money is a social construct.
Yes.
Period. Full stop. Right. And you explained it very well. Things have value because we agree they do. Why gold? Right. Sure, it's shiny and pretty and this, that, and the other. But like,
Yeah.
why gold versus something else?
Right.
It's just
Right.
because that's how things evolved over time. So, and I have this conversation a lot at cocktail. The money is a social construct. When people say to me, Bitcoin is worthless and such, and they quote, old comments from Warren Buffett from years ago that you don't hear that much these days, by the way, that this has no value, that it's all just, vaporware. And when you bring them back to this concept that the dollar, particularly since coming off the gold standard, which is also arguably this no different social construct than what we're talking about now. But when people start to understand that money is in its totality a social construct since the time of the Romans printing the first coins,
Right.
then they're able to kind of get their head around it. But I think the reason that it's sort of a concept that people initially struggle with is because they've never thought about U.S. currency and the dollar that they use as being itself a social construct. So you got to get past that head scratcher first, and then adopt it to understand the value of digital assets. And by the way, we're saying digital assets broadly. There are thousands and thousands and thousands of them.
Yeah.
Most of them are not worth looking at and investing in.
Yeah.
There are certainly people that have made a lot of money speculating on the different crypto exchanges. Some of those degen guys I talked about. But for most of our viewers, for most folks, you want to stick with the top four, top five. Ethereum, Bitcoin, Solana, that sort of thing. You don't need to go that much further down the food chain.
Where do you think we'll be 5 years from now, 10 years from now with the digital currencies versus the US dollar?
Well, that's a really good question. And what I think is implicit in part of what you're asking is what happens with CBDC, right? So CBDC is a central bank digital currency. It's something that other countries, more authoritarian, non-democratic regimes, have already looked at implementing or are starting to implement to replace cash and traditional currency. Why? Because then they can control every aspect of your financial life, including, immediately deducting taxes, parking tickets, whatever it is,
Yeah.
without any due process or any ability for the citizenry to object or have the opportunity to question those kinds of totalitarian types of activities. One of the things that was in the Genius Act, I believe, that we're just talking about, this crypto legislation put forth by the Trump administration, or certainly inspired by the Trump administration, put forth by Congress, is that we would not have a CBDC in the United States, right? Because the concept of that is very much at odds with what the founding fathers had in mind in terms of our constitutional freedoms and our ability to have due process and things of that nature. So I worry about that. I worry about that not so much here. Although I'm sure a mayor like Mamdani would probably love to have a CBDC in New York City, but thankfully that's not within the scope of what he can do. But that does concern me, and we even see countries like Sweden, for example. I was there a couple times this year for family reasons. There's no cash. You cannot use cash anywhere, right? And so you're starting to already see whether it's an explicit adoption and implementation of central bank digital currency you're seeing steps towards that. And I think those are threats to our freedom. So one of the things that is in this legislation we're talking about before, trying to, as it's called, sort of future-proof this legislation, so it can't just be converted around, by another administration that maybe has different ideas about a CBDC. That concerns me. I think we're going to see the value and appreciation of some of these assets, like a Bitcoin, because Bitcoin, as you point out, that it has a scarcity. Assets gather value through their scarcity. That's another thing that's of 100% of the time true in Wall Street and finance.
Mm-hmm.
You could see, Bitcoin well over $1 million a coin, $5 million a coin, depending on how far out in time you go. And I think you'll see blockchain, and this is something, taking just the currency side of it off the table for a minute and looking at it from a technology perspective. Blockchain holds the promise of extending banking services and helping accelerate industrialization and economic advancement and prosperity in emerging nations, where we don't have to go and put a bank branch with columns and pens at the end of chains. You can take the unbanked or the underbanked and put them on banking rails almost instantaneously.
Right.
I
Creates
think
accessibility.
Correct. Yeah, and I think that holds the promise of bringing a lot. Not to get too dramatic about this, but bringing a lot of people in the developing world out of poverty.
Yes.
Because if you don't have the ability to have access to some form of a banking system, it's one of those impediments to economic growth that's very hard to overcome.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So, lightning round here at the end.
Uh-oh.
How do you stay up with the 24/7 news cycle as busy as you are?
Lots of televisions on in my house, in my office, and green rooms. Lots of listening in the car. Um, we within Market Rebellion, we have something called the Rebel Roundup that comes out every day, that summarizes all of the major economic and market news, as well as some geopolitical stuff as well, for myself, the other members of the team, and several thousand of our members and clients at Market Rebellion. So that's really effective. And when you find yourself sort of in the new, I don't consider myself somebody that's in the media, quote unquote, right? Like, that's not my job per se. But when you're on, these major networks, as often as I have the privilege to be on, it just sort of becomes part of your daily routine. You know what I mean? It's just, you're being in the news cycle. It just becomes part of your DNA, I guess.
What content is influencing you right now? Podcasts, books. What are you
Ooh,
consuming?
ooh, man. Certainly, podcasts, I would say as well. Closely watching the evolution of network and broadcast news media, right? There's so much change going on there. Comcast, MSNBC, CNBC, et cetera. Trying to see, who's going to sort of win in the competition for eyeballs and content. The concept of the second and third screen as being relevant when we're trying to understand how to connect and interact with our audience. So I'd say the answer to your question is all the above, because to me, there's not currently one clear place that I can get everything that I need. So, I look at X, I do some pods. I still try to read recreationally, although I read so much, for work and business, that reading a novel on the beach. I'm too ADD for that. So it's
Yeah, I don't have a lot of patience for reading a novel on the beach, but I right now I'm reading Unreasonable Hospitality, so I'm sure you've probably read that as well. Uh, all right. Well, I appreciate you joining me today. My last question for you is, what if, none of us are promised it tomorrow. So if today were your last day, what is the one word that you would want to be remembered for?
Oh, geez, that is a really, really hard one. The
I like asking the hard questions.
one word that I want, is it a title, an adjective, or can you give me a little bit
Whatever
of?
you want it to be.
Oh man, I, father. I mean, if there's
I love that.
any role I want to excel at, that is front of mind for me all the time. And that is something that can sometimes be challenging when you have the kind of schedule and responsibilities that I do. It would be that, right?
Oh, I love that.
That's my legacy. Not the rest of this stuff. Nobody will remember whether or not I called NVIDIA at 95. They'll see what my legacy is as expressed through my daughter. So
I love that. Well, tell your daughter hello for me.
I will.
I do want to have her on at some point as well. And I am so honored and I appreciate you so much for joining me today.
Absolutely. My pleasure. The honor was mine.